Hello and welcome to Zamna's 5th webinar. I'm joined by a fantastic group of industry experts, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion on how health and identity need to come together to get our industry going again and get it going at scale. But first, I recognise that times are indeed very, very tough, not just for airlines, but also for airports, for tourism and the whole ecosystem that sits around that. The third lockdown for the UK has been really, really tough for our industry. There's no denying that. But it's not just a case of it being tough for our industry, it's also tough for us as individuals. But we do continue to battle on, albeit on tiny little squares on screens. But my hope is that despite that, we can still have a fantastic discussion today. And with the hope of vaccinations and increased testing, hopefully winning the battle now against COVID, that indeed recovery is not just something to aim for, but is within sight. The fact that the industry is struggling should not be ignored as part of our discussion today. No one is in a position where they can just throw money at the problem, but rather the industry is looking to see how existing initiatives around identity, biometrics, data management, and the progress of technology on the whole can come to the fore now, and how actually we can unlock growth for the future. Actually, at Zamna, we often say, stop innovating and start executing. Why? Well, we know actually that the solutions exist to ensure identity and health can be combined, and for this to be inclusive as well, available to all. And I'm confident we have all the building blocks to deliver solutions, and that's what we'll dig into today. But the challenges are really, really tough. I was reading just today, actually, from Europol, that criminals are selling fake COVID-19 certificates in Europe's major airports and stations. That's according to Europol, the European Union's police agency. It said fake negative certificates were found being sold in airports and stations in France, the UK, and Spain. And this just comes after several European countries told incoming travellers they need a negative test in order to enter their territory. As we scale to fly more people, this issue has become more and more important, and we need to tackle this sort of issue head on. So that's what we're here to discuss this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. But first of all, let me introduce you to our panelists for today. And then I will invite each of them to reflect on their perspective of how health and identity will come together and how growth will take place in our industry. So first of all, let me introduce you to Abhi Chacko. Abhi leads the innovation at Gatwick Airport, and he heads the business unit, which provides IT services to the whole campus and customers. And he does that on a commercial basis. Abhi has more than 20 years of experience in the aviation sector, and he's led a number of innovations while working at Gatwick. Secondly, let me introduce you to Christine. Christine is has an extensive career, international, and experience across the whole of aviation, travel and technology sectors. She was the CEO of Flybe until July 2019, when it successfully sold the airline to a consortium. Before that, she was also an accountable manager for CityJet, the first female CEO for an Irish licensed airline, and she was essential in securing commitment from investors during the scale of CityJet from Air France KLM and delivering a deep restructuring plan for the newly independent airline. Currently, she serves on the board for Datalex, and she's passionate about corporate sustainability and climate change. And she's an advisor of ZeroAvia, builder of the first practically zero-emission aviation powertrain. Christine also possesses an MSc in aeronautics and a master's in business. Quite the role there. Next, let me introduce you to Simon Watkin, in brackets MBE as well. And he's a senior policy advisor for the UK government with 36 years of hands-on experience. Simon has worked in many of the offices that are involved in international travel, from the Passport Office, aviation security, borders, and more recently as policy advisor to the Home Office. A well-respected, pragmatic individual who is passionate about moving forward and bringing forward change. And last but by no means least, let me introduce you to Simon Wilcox. He's Vice President for Pangiam, heading up a lot of their activity in Europe and the Middle East and Africa. Simon previously was at Heathrow Airport and was the driving force behind a lot of the automation and identity and biometric advancement that the airport's seen over the last few years. So that's who we've got in our amazing panel today. And before I invite Christine just to say a few words of her reflections of the industry, let me talk to you as attendees and let you know how you can ask questions to this panel as well. We love your participation, and we love to get questions either to the whole panel or directly to a specific person on the panel too. So to do this, simply within the chat function or within the comment function of YouTube, put your question in there. If you could also mention who you are and maybe what organization you come from as well, that will help set that question up and we can contextualize it, and I'll ask that question then to our panelists. So I hope that's all clear. Let me now move on, and I'm going to introduce you to Christine, who will say a few words on her reflection of health, identity, and travel recovery. Christine, over to you. Christine, you're on mute at the moment. It's like a proper Zoom call. Yes. There we go.
Sorry. Yes, to Raoul, I really support what you said in your introduction. The industry is really facing a unique and critical crisis, and I think that we thought that start of 2021 would be much more positive than, in fact, we are facing today a very critical situation. And what we are also facing is a shift of difficulties. And I was reading some articles of a travel press today and found a quite good description of what is going on. We move from a fear of flying, meaning being afraid to fly because you might catch a virus while traveling. And I think with all the measures taken by all the airlines and the travel stakeholder, I think that's something that completely or almost disappeared, to a fear of arriving, because now travelers are afraid to fly because heaven knows what will happen when they arrive. I think there is no more demand or very low demand in travel, and the UK is definitely in the lowest demand in Europe. And we can also face today a lack of consistency between measures taken by different governments with constant change. Some organizations like IATA and Thematic are trying to give some visibility, but the constant change is creating even more uncertainty, and travelers prefer to delay or not to book. So there is today no visibility of what could change. And vaccination is very successful in the UK, but the question is, how will vaccination success will be used in order to restore this demand and this trust? And this trust from the travelers, meaning how travelers could trust the overall system, but also trust from governments that need also to have the trust in the systems that will be put in place to ensure safety and border control. So, and that's why I strongly believe that health, safety, and identity should be combined to allow, a quick recovery with a better confidence in safety and safe borders. And one of the projects I think that would restore this trust would be a very secure and safe digital health passport, like the one today, but the paper one we are using today for the yellow fever when we are traveling to some countries.
Thank you, Christine. Really well put. I really like the way you've brought fear into that, actually fear of flying to fear of arriving. That's a really good perspective, something that I'm sure we'll discuss shortly. Let me hand over now to Simon Watkin. So health passport, Simon, do you want to incorporate that into your little introduction as well?
Thank you, Raoul. I think, as you mentioned, I've been doing border security work for some long time. And I think from my perspective, I have to acknowledge that public health didn't really come into it. And to a degree, there is some complacency in the whole international community that we could focus, particularly in the wake of 9/11, focus on countering terrorism and focusing on countering serious organized crime, and all will be well. And I think collectively, the whole international community has perhaps taken its eye off the ball when it came to public health. And what effectively we're seeing now is a collision between an old analog world. And you say, when I issued passports 30 years ago. They were as analog as they could be. But today we're in a world where most countries around the world are issuing machine readable passports with digital chips, and we can use that to implement the contactless border, which is going to be a key requirement going forward, because things that we took for granted, handing over our identity document to a border control officer for them to flick through pages and hand back to us, is, at least for the immediate future, going to be something that we're all concerned about. So the whole pandemic has hastened the movement and progression towards contactless borders. And it is, as I say, this collision between the old analog world and digital, and the future is clearly going to be increasingly digital. We looked at Annex 9 of the ICAO standards and the passenger locator form. It was a paper form. We saw many countries around the world, their response was to create a paper form and have lots of pieces of paper being handed between individuals. Some countries progressed to a digital passenger locator form. Some of them even linked it to their border controls, but not all of them. And I think the big issue that's facing us a lot now is the role of the carrier. Is it for the carrier, or is this a transaction that must be taking place between the traveller and the authorities of both the territory they're departing from and the territory to which they're travelling? So I think the key going forward is going to be global standards. We've done global standards in relation to those travel documents. That's why we have those common format machine readable passports. Maybe we should be striving for common format vaccination or test certification documentation. But we must address issues of inequality. We can't presume that all countries around the world are in exactly the same position to be able to do these things. So we need to make sure that in going forward, we're implementing systems that both keep people safe, but don't create disadvantage and inequality in individuals who are not able to participate in international travel. But an interesting time, unfortunately, for these circumstances we find ourselves in, but it is going to cause us to rethink how we approach identity and health at the border in ways we haven't done for a long time. Raoul.
Thank you, Simon. Really, really insightful. And you raised some really interesting points there. I think the piece around certainly the disenfranchised, those people who haven't got identities, is very, very valid. I've seen that the UNHCR talk about 1 billion people's worth of, or 1 billion people within the world haven't got actually an identity to a high enough level to actually be able to do social tasks. Now, some of those people might be children, but there are a whole load of adults as well. So discrimination is an important part of that. So that needs to be borne in mind as well. And inclusivity in all that, and how we think about that for international travel, needs to be thought through as well. It's not all just a digital solution that's magical that will happen. Right, let's move on then. So Simon Wilcox, the other Simon W we have on the in the room today. Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I think we've heard a couple of times about health passports, health passes, etc. But really the thought comes to mind, is it really about health? So for me, it's about the risk that the traveller poses from a public health perspective, and I think increasingly whether or not they meet the entry criteria for where they're travelling to. And I think there is a difference. And I think, let's face it, currently the focus is very much on COVID and how to unlock. So is it therefore about your COVID status and whether a government or an airline will actually let you travel or indeed let you in? I think we just need to make sure we're clear on the sort of the task at hand. Another thought that comes to mind here is that, we have a history in this industry of adding layers of complexity. And I think we need to be careful that we don't just add another layer. And as an example, maybe slightly tongue in cheek, will authorities want our medical records to allow us to travel in the future? Of course, it is in jest, but you could see a potential path of how you move from health to a much more complex set of criteria. Touched on already, I think, as Simon said in his introduction, health has been a part of facilitation. It's always been a part, but not necessarily on the scale, and it's certainly risen up. And at best, what comes to mind is that we're talking about a digitalization of an old and existing process. But as a slight concern, I think in the marketplace, we can certainly see it's been flooded by new providers offering health apps, with a looming challenge of how to integrate that into the passenger journey of the future. So digitalization and trust will be core. The core of that will be about data. And I think, Raoul, you mentioned around fake COVID certificates. We know that's a challenge. So I think there is an opportunity for a higher degree of automation in issuing of COVID results, and the integration on the back end to be able to sort of provide more trust to whether it's an airline or a government. That's something to consider. So I do believe, though, that digital identity has a part to play in the solution to prevent fraud and enhance that trust. But I think there's lots of debate still about how to implement it into the passenger journey, and whether or not health and identity has to be combined. But of course, there are many existing initiatives underway in order to look at how to digitize the existing passenger journey and digital ID. We've already touched on a couple of times the discussion about whose role is it, and I don't believe it's for the airports and the airline. In my opinion, public health is a government responsibility. It is absolutely true that airports, airlines have a role to play in terms of facilitating, but the clear and consistent policies and processes are needed, and I think it's fair to say we're not quite there yet. I'd summarize the sort of the environment at the moment as being sort of unwelcoming, pretty unwelcoming in order to sort of get people to travel. And that clarity on the requirements and ensuring that the customers are informed is really important, as well as making it as easy as possible for them to understand those requirements and then to comply through the journey. And recently I had some experience of traveling myself with about 15 different bits of paper and actually not needing things and doing tests unnecessary. It's a very confusing situation. Technology can definitely play a part in helping. I don't think any of us will deny that. But I think a lot of technology already exists. It's therefore about how do we apply it into the marketplace. But policy and leadership, I think, is the bit that's still missing, and there's definitely more work to do in that space. The blunt instruments of border closures and blanket quarantine, I think everyone will be hugely disappointed by. But of course, we must protect public health. I completely get that. But I think there is an opportunity to open borders for travel using a risk-based approach. It's rare these days that we have to stop people traveling for security reasons, and in the past we may have had to do that for maybe 1 or 2 days as threats arise. But we're able to put reasonable mitigation steps in to help and ensure the safety and security of travellers and staff. And I think we can do the same here when it comes to health. And at the back end of last year, I was encouraged to see ICAO published a guidance manual on the adoption and use of a risk-based travel approach, which is now needing for member states in order to really look at and adopt and trying to get to some sort of sense of normality, of consistency, sorry. So will COVID help accelerate contactless travel and the adoption of digital identity, including biometrics? My general thought is yes. Although I am increasingly seeing for every one reason to say yes, that there are 2 or 3 reasons to say no, and it's certainly not an easy, clean answer. There will be plenty of debate, I'm sure, through the discussion. Finally, though, I'd say historically, pandemics have been a huge platform for innovation and change, and I don't doubt that this will be the same. So, we've got to make the best of a bad situation, and I think coming together, maybe in a new era of data exchange and collaboration, I think it's those 2 bits combined, that will really help recovery and to build back better. So that's it from me for now.
Thank you, Simon. Well, you covered a lot of ground there, it has to be said. So well done in that regard. But there's some interesting points that you raise. I think the point about not needing or wanting yet another layer is really important. The customers and the processes already have a lot of layers in place, and adding to that is not going to help us progress and move forward. And I agree completely that the technology largely is in place to facilitate some of these things to happen. It's a case of policy coming through and then actually sweating the assets of the technology that's already in place. So let's move on to Abhi, who's pioneered some of this technology at Gatwick Airport. Abhi, what have you got to say?
Thanks, Raoul. So in the context of COVID, a lot of people think that digital health passports is essential to resume travel. And they worry that it'll be difficult to handle the pre-COVID level traffic without the introduction of digital health passports. Now, I don't share that view completely. So let me explain. In order to make the COVID era regulated travel happen, we need to bring three components together. So one is the biometric of the passenger linked to his passport, the identity of the passenger, the vaccination or test result coming from the lab, and the destination restriction coming from a system like Thematic. So if we can get these three components together, then it'll be pretty easy for that system to give a simple yes or no answer to the airline when they need to decide whether a passenger is fit to fly. However, if you examine closely, you can see the vaccination centers and how vaccination is being done. I don't think the governments will be in a mood to slow it down even a minute for linking the vaccination result with a passport or biometric or anything of that sort. Secondly, for the digital health passport to work, we have to integrate the system to multiple labs across the world and multiple airlines across the world. That we are talking about quite a lot of interoperability, in a short period of time. And thirdly, the regulations are changing on a weekly basis in every country. So do you think the speed of automation will catch up with the volatility in such restrictions? So those are the sort of concerns that made me conclude that it's reasonably clear to conclude that firstly, it's unreasonable to expect that there will be a worldwide digital health passport this year, which will be applicable across airlines and countries. Surely there will be point solutions which are introduced by a specific airline, or introduced by a specific government. And also, secondly, we will not see the pre-pandemic level traffic until the travel restrictions are almost fully lifted. And when the travel restrictions are lifted, you don't really need the manual checks we are worried about. So it should balance out overall. Now, I'm not saying there is no case for biometric travel or digital health passport. There is a solid case, but that is mainly for long-term normal travel and not the this year's the constraints that we are going to face this year because of government regulations or COVID-related restrictions. So my view is that it makes sense to continue to pursue the journey of introducing digital health passports or making the journey seamless with the help of biometric, but please be mindful of the impracticalities in order, in getting that realized in this year when the COVID situation is really, really active. So what we could do, in my opinion, is simply to bring in clarity rather than confusion, bring in clarity for passengers and for staff before they travel, as opposed to attempting to automate away the nightmare that we are currently facing.
Thank you, Abhi. Very, very well put there. Clarity, I think, is a really, really important point that you raised. And I remember we talked a few weeks ago about how actually through a simplification that will naturally give rise to more travel, because fundamentally the customer will be less confused. The customer will be less anxious. When they look at travel today and they try and work out what they need to do, it's really, really hard to do so. And as you say, things are changing on a frequent basis. Indeed, we were talking to some government people just the other day, and someone in government actually said, well, actually 5 apps to fly on 2 flights is bonkers. A reflection, really a little bit exaggerated, but a reflection on some of the needs that are coming through at the moment that require a mobile device, download an app, prove identity potentially multiple times, then link it to this and that and the other, and it becomes quite onerous, and it doesn't fill the customer with confidence to fly. So back to Christine, really, about actually the fear of flying or arriving and knowing that you're actually got everything sorted out is very, very real. So Abhi raised the point there around biometric passports. Vaccination passports might not be the right thing to do there, but a link between test results and vaccinations and your genuine passport, something that's already recognized at the international level, might well be something that we can do to unlock the next stage. Simon Wilcox, do you want to come in on that, about that kind of relationship, and let's talk a little bit about trust as well in that point.
Yeah, if I may, you mentioned a point a second ago that prompted something in my mind, Raoul, about when we talk about travel, of course, we're looking at it from an air travel perspective in this discussion, but of course, from a customer's perspective, it is far more about the entire travel experience. And therefore, whatever you might need to do, you mentioned sort of maybe exaggerating 5 apps for the travel. It is possible when you consider hotel, car rental, etc., and all of those individual requirements. And potentially downloading an app or getting a test certificate, etc., it does bring you back to sort of a good old bit of paper along the way, and the reassurance of having that to be able to show people at different points. So I think there's definitely something for us to consider about how do you make it as easy as possible across all aspects of travel. But of course, we then get to the problem of do I trust this piece of paper, and is it from a recognized source? Do I accept that this? I think Simon Watkin mentioned earlier, every format of a test certificate can be different. Therefore, depending on who's looking at it, do I trust it? Potentially, it might be in a different language. All of those challenges are definitely something to battle with. I agree with Abhi's point about, is it likely to be a single system? I don't think there will be a single system. And I think there will be, therefore we've got to provide enough reassurance to the customer at every touch point in the journey, and be able to sort of get as much consistency as you possibly can, so that the customer can trust it and feel confident to book and along the way. And the final bit that comes for me here is around, there probably isn't a one size fits all, because every person that you're showing something to, it's being done for a particular purpose. Whether it's so it's not being used for the same purpose along every different touch point in the journey. So is there ever going to be consistency? I'm not entirely sure.
Thank you, Simon. Christine, I'm going to come to you from the airline point of view, where customers are going to be anxious with all these different requirements. What do you see from the airline's point of view, and what do you think about what the airline can do, and what the government or indeed the airport needs to do to help bring this together, so the customer has that confidence and that checklist doesn't grow and grow and grow, but actually compress it a little bit?
I follow also. I think that from a responsibility or action, who is doing what? I think many airlines in the world have been trying to find or test new solution. But the way the processes are built today and the different accountabilities, airlines are following, government, let's say, a recommendation, and borders are the responsibility of government. So it's difficult for airlines to take responsibilities that they can try to convince or try to lobby, but that's not a final responsibility. So the governments have a fantastic role to play, and the airlines and all the, not only the airlines, but the travel stakeholders have to be around the table trying to find solutions together. But at the end of the day, ultimately, it's responsibility of governments to take a decision. I think that to follow up on what has been said before, we are not trying to find a solution for the next 6 months of 1 year, because we all know that the virus will stay with us, not in its current form, but maybe in different forms and variant forms. So the idea is to build a system that will be sustainable and resilient, even if there are some, new forms of pandemic that we think that will happen in the future. So it's very fundamental to find something, being one system, 2 systems, 3 systems, but to restore this confidence by having global standards, formats, and it's true that systems should follow processes. So if we don't agree on global standards, it will be difficult to build any system. But I think this ultimate goal in finding a solution that we allow the world to restore this freedom to fly, I think is fundamental.
Thank you, Christine. Really good insight there. Simon Watkin, I should say. I'm going to come to you then. So Christine raised the importance of government's role within this. There's a demand that's kind of growing about governments putting the right policies in place to make this identity-centric in all that we do. When you look to the international stage, are there other examples of other governments who have done this successfully to some degree? And how might that shape future policy?
I think, Raoul, we're still waiting to see some clear successes. I mean, it's interesting, the conversation about multiple apps. I mean, we've seen in recent months discussions about apps within apps, which was certainly something that the one government was trying to do and ended up not being able to do that. I think it's right that this is something fundamentally between the traveller and the authorities of the places from where they're traveling from and traveling to. But the carrier does have a role in facilitating this. And I think it's really important that that balance is struck correctly, and that we're not, as governments, imposing on carriers functions and responsibilities that go well over and above the operation of a passenger service. One reflection I'm taking away already from the conversation we're having is that as international travellers, in the days when we were doing it regularly, we were very, very used to proving our identity. We had to prove our identity to cross an international border. We would do that in an old analog way by producing a paper document and our biographic information being relied upon, but increasingly we're doing that biometrically using e-gates, facial recognition. People are very, very used to that. And in a post-pandemic world, that touchless ability is going to be prized, I think. We're also very used to demonstrating our nationality. We all carry little paper books, which are representations of our nationality. We need to demonstrate our nationality. We may need to demonstrate a permission to travel from one place to another, and we're all very used to that. What we're essentially talking about now is another form of permission and another aspect of our identity, which is that we are free from the virus, either because we have a vaccination certificate or we have a test status. And I think in some ways it's about a recognition that perhaps the new normal is one where health is an important part of our crossing of international borders as our identity and our nationality.
Thank you, Simon. So let's swing that round then to actually say, okay, if we've got identity and we know identity can work well within an airport world, like you say, we've proven that in a number of different ways. How do we bring that to life when we're looking at some of the restrictions that actually sit around airport process? So we know that there's a need to test and to bring evidence of tests to airport. If this carries on as it does today with testing happening in airport car parks and things like that, it doesn't feel like a good response of our responsibility for public health there. So what, if we've got identity sorted in the airport, what do we need to do around health and linking that to identity away from the airport? And what sort of technology solutions are sitting out there? And does it all end up in a mobile device, or is there a different way we can actually tackle that problem? That's an open question to any of our amazing panelists.
Something I learned about, I think it was only yesterday, the LSR2 on the machine readable passport chip. Apparently it was, by understanding, it was created to record information, and maybe the health information could be included on the passport. I think there'll be lots of concerns about that, and that's one of the fundamental questions: is the evidence of your identity and your health separate from your evidence of your identity and your nationality? I mean, that's a question that has to be asked and answered. But maybe there is technology out there already that can help support some of this.
If you really look at the hierarchy of influence, so the infection level in the destination and the origin is going to influence what the destination government is going to say in terms of what are the restrictions, and that those restrictions have to be imposed on the airline, and the airline has to then impose that restriction on passenger. That's the way it is functioning at the moment. And the public mood is against international travel. As long as there is concern around COVID, public mood is going to be against international travel, and the restrictions are continuing to be imposed on the airlines. And the sort of validation that the airline will have to do, again, has to be determined by what the authority on the other end is going to state. So if they are going to state a paper document is what is essential for them to check the passenger has gone through vaccination or through PCR test, then that's exactly what the airline is supposed to check. Because there's no point in an airline checking a biometric way of verifying a passenger has been vaccinated or has got PCR negative test, but the authority on the other end expects a paper-based form to be presented. And then you will have to deal with the mismatch between these two as well. So in short, essentially, how this is going to be enforced and managed will largely be driven by what the destination country authorities are going to outline. And I don't really see them outlining a biometric solution across the world, but there will be point solutions, as I said. Dubai might introduce a biometric way of declaring the health information before they arrive. India may rely on a paper-based form. So airlines will have to adjust their processes in line with the destination that they are flying to.
But if I may, it's a situation today without COVID, meaning today, depending where to fly, even before the pandemic, you are facing different situation, being e-gates or being paper, etc. So I think that international travelers or travelers that are used to fly between point A and B, I don't think it's a reason why people are afraid to fly today, because they have been used in the past to have different experiences depending on the culture and the level of technology of the origin and destination. I think it's more about defining what's the next step. And I agree with you, it could be a paper form to start with, and then it will be more integrated. But today it's more the certainty of what you need and what are the conditions to travel out of the country and in the arrival country that is necessary. But the fact that it will be a multitude and hybrid solution, we were already in this situation before. And the information that it's the additional one today, it's health information, and it will be available in different forms for a number of years and maybe forever.
Yeah, the reason why people are not traveling, it was pretty obvious from the flight, the passenger volume patterns that was available at Gatwick, is the restrictions, not the fear of flying, not the actual procedural hurdles, but the restrictions related to arriving into a country and the expense related to following those restrictions, such as PCR test. So those are the main barriers, and not the actual logistics of showing a paper or even using biometric solution, or even concerned about getting infected with COVID.
I agree with much of the conversation there from my fellow panelists. I think there will always be multiple ways of doing this, and from a purely technical and sort of solution focus, I think we've already got some of the capability that exists. I think electronic travel authorizations, you could see the need to be able to demonstrate either vaccine or test requirements building into the electronic travel authorization, and that might be valid per trip instead of for a period. You could, as Simon described, it could be integrated into your passport. Whether that's in the built into the chip of the passport, or in the sort of a digital form, maybe on the phone in the future. I think all of those are options, as well as maybe more towards the government-led biometric systems such as Aadhaar in India, or sort of the TVS system used in the US. You could see sort of a recording that you've met the requirement and then build it in, and allowing in a passenger journey the opportunity to be able to send a message off to a system through an interactive API and get a response back. I think all of those are options. And I agree with Abhi's last point. The bit that's stopping people traveling at the moment is just purely the restrictions and the border closures. I think once that opens up and the confidence is there, then we will find ways of building the digitalization into the right processes. And for a time, there may be back to a bit of paper. People will travel, and then it will be about optimizing that into as best we can in the sort of midterm, and maybe long term. Maybe we won't need it, but I think I probably suspect once we start, we probably won't stop.
I'm really interested in how all this is going to affect human behaviors, because I mean, just look at what are quite simple things like spending cash. I think we've all known, even growing up, you'd have a coin or a note and think, whose hands have these coins and notes been through? Today, I haven't spent any cash in a long time because it's all contactless, it's all electronic. Is there going to be a reticence of people to hold bits of paper? We've just talked a little bit about bits of paper. A lot will depend on whether the public mood around the world, and that includes authorities who have members of staff potentially handling pieces of paper. Are they going to want to do that, or are they going to want these things to happen in a much more non-contact form? So pieces of paper just doesn't quite sound right in a post-pandemic world. But as I say, a lot will depend on recovery time from the pandemic and the extent to which the community of people move on and go, oh yes, we had that pandemic, but we've moved on, and it's now okay to touch money that people have touched, to touch surfaces that people have touched, to provide my paper document to a person who will touch it. I don't know who they are, I don't know how healthy they are, but they've touched it and they've given me my document back. That's, I think, going to perhaps be a factor in how people both interact in society generally, but particularly in travel. And I think why, as experts in the travel world, we should at least be thinking about how can we make this happen without bits of paper and without touching. The technology does exist, and as I said earlier, the real challenge is going to be able to make sure that we can get people able to travel, but able to do so at different levels of technological advancement, because obviously the technology is not going to be equitable all around the world at the same time.
Yes, Simon, I think you've raised some really interesting points there. We've got to look forward, I believe, and we've got to look at what the world will look like when we are starting to scale again. If we end up in a paper-based world, my fear is that we'll hit capacity very, very quickly within pinch points of, it could be border control, or it could be departure processes, bag drops, you name it. So if we're going to move those sort of checks away from those points, ideally, you don't want people actually leaving their home if they haven't got all they need to travel. But how do you give that person the absolute confidence? Well, first of all, you need to know who the actual individual is. So I know from experience with Zamna that self-declared passport information, for example, has a very, very high 33% hit rate of inaccuracies per set of data entered. That's remarkably high. And actually that results in further checks within the airport to mop up the bad data on the routes where it really, really matters. Simon mentioned before about risk mitigations that can go in, and that's what airlines do. And the same is now going to apply on arrival in destinations as well. So if someone arrives without that correct piece of paper, forget the ETA and the APIS side of things, but if it's an incorrect piece of paper, what happens? Are they turned away? Do they pay for a few nights stay? Do they pay for 2 weeks stay? And who's footing the bill for all that sort of thing? So if we're going to actually drive to the point where we've got efficiency and we can scale airports, then surely there is a responsibility that comes back to us as the thinkers and the thought leaders in this industry to say, well, actually identity and accuracy and verified data needs to be established before the airport, and health needs to be linked to that in some way as one of the things that needs to go in there. So how do we actually do that? And how do we ensure that when it comes to the simplification of the process in the airport that Abhi has talked about, that those people, those customers can literally walk through with confidence, with everything sorted out and without being turned away at any particular checkpoint?
Can I,
Simon,
can I come back on the point Simon raised about the paper bit? I absolutely agree. I think the technology is there to prevent us from having to go back to bits of paper. The reality is, though, in having done a bit of travel just before Christmas, I had a few options. I could have one piece of paper, which was going to be accepted by everybody, or I could download 5 different apps, fill in self-attestations along the way, or I could just fill in a piece of paper. And sometimes the simplistic piece is right, especially if you're a once-a-year traveller. That might be more appropriate. If you're a frequent traveller, then absolutely moving to more digitalisation completely is the right thing. But to enable everything to move forward, there has to be more global standardization and more consistency in the processes, because it's amazing how many different locations I think we can all see today. Some places are accepting one type of test but not a different type of test. Is it 48 hours or 72 hours, etc.? All of those things I think drive people back to, if I can feel it, touch it, and show it to somebody, that's a lot easier. I'd love definitely the opportunity to move much towards digitalization and more centralized, but it's not always the right solution. And I guess we need to find the right balance, but governments have got a massive role to play in driving that level of consistency.
I share that view, Simon. I think we should all work towards that, but it's going to take time, is the point that I'm trying to make. And we should be prepared to deal with the current spike or this year's increase in traffic without the help of such a digital health passport or a completely integrated solution. Some of the simple things that we could do, or the airlines could do, is to, as I said, provide clarity to the passenger, provide clarity to the staff in terms of what is expected for a particular passenger from going from one origin station to a destination, depending on his nationality. What are the sort of criteria that the person has to meet? Maybe the passenger can self-declare that, they have met all these things. And I take your point, Raoul, that the details that they may fill in might go wrong. So they may have to rely on the paper-based document, such as PCR test or vaccination certificate, but they can at least state correctly whether they have got a PCR certificate from the listed labs in the airline site, or whether they have been vaccinated. This sort of tick box exercise is probably something that we can do and we should do for bringing clarity for the passengers.
So okay, let's take a slightly longer view then, because I understand the points you're making there about the need to kind of do something in the very immediate. When I think back to my experience with British Airways, at scale becomes the challenge, and how you scale is really, really important, and you can hit the boundaries of scale very, very quickly with a small amount of process. So when I think forward to that point, I can't help but thinking that actually identity is critical in this and in linking things together, and there's a trust element to that as well. So if you think forward, bravely think forward 12 months, 18 months, what from an airport point of view, what would be the ideal solution for passenger identity verification that would really work for airports and indeed airlines, that could really unlock perhaps what was always promised in the old days of seamless travel?
So if you look at how we look at identity across multiple airlines and multiple airports, I mean, you can solve that problem from an airline perspective, because there are technology solutions out there which can allow the passenger to register their biometric on their mobile phone, and then airline can actually do a one-time verification when they come to the airport, and then do use that biometric for repeated travel. That's one way of solving the problem. An airport could do this in a similar way, or an airport group could do it in a similar way. But ideally, if it is, if you're asking my view, the best solution or an ideal solution for the future would be a passenger-focused service provider collecting biometric for the passenger, and also keeping the biometric for the passenger. Now, the biometric itself may be kept in passenger's phone, but the hash of the biometric is kept in the passenger-facing service provider's system. Now, that service provider could then act as an identity provider for various airlines and airports. or across airlines and airports. So passenger will be happy to have one service provider to deal with, and then through that they can communicate which airline and airport they would like to share their identity with. A bit like credit cards. So you could have a Visa card. Visa in this example would be the service provider for the biometrics. So Visa card attested by a number of different airports or issued by different banks will be equivalent to attested, the biometric attestation done by different airports, and then used at every checkpoint, which would be more like used at every merchant, every card machine when you use your credit card. So something similar to a card network. If there is a provider which can provide biometric identity network across airports and airlines, that would be ideal, because then you can of course add on the health aspects onto the same sort of identity as well.
Thank you, Abhi. Let's take that then. I'm going to kind of point that now at Christine. So from a airline point of view, I'm thinking again back in my airline days, holding on to that passenger has always been important. And we can have a little bit of a joke to sort of say about whose passenger is it. And I've had these conversations with both Abhi and Simon Wilcox in the past. Is it the airline's passenger? Is it the airport's passenger? But the passenger in the end has shelled out their money to a brand. So from an airline point of view, Christine, how important is it to keep that passenger within your ecosystem and not potentially have to rely on other third parties to help facilitate the journey?
Well, I think it's been an never-ending story, but I think that the priority of airline for now is to make sure that demand is starting again, and also to ensure that we learn from this crisis to find systems that will help us to face maybe some similar crises in the future. And airlines are, really trying with organizations like IATA and ICAO to find solutions. It's not easy for them because each country could also go in different directions. So I think that maybe more than ever, airlines want to find, global standards where if they have to share some information to facilitate travel, it will be critical. I think one point also to mention is absolutely the priority is seamless and restoring trust and making sure that customers want to really travel again. But the other one that is also quite significant is all these additional measures are creating additional costs for airlines that are significant, because when you need to check paper form or different format of documents, then all the fantastic investment you've done in technology, e-checking, and everything that has been invested by airline has been completely stopped so far, because they have to add additional resources, additional cost for the same outcome. So there are two priorities. First, restoring demand is the top one, and second, making sure these processes moving forward are efficient, and they are absolutely not efficient today.
It's a really interesting one. I think there's an interesting tension there as well, because I remember at the beginning you were talking about the fear of departing, and then the fear of arriving as well. So the actual the anxiety on a customer in particular can be quite high, and that can put people off from traveling. Almost the fear of the unknown. And what I've seen, you've got this tension then from an airline point of view that says, yes, I want to kind of get more people on my planes, but I can't invest in what I need to do to actually show the customer that everything is in the right state, and potentially reliant on other third parties, and the loss of control with that as well. So I think it's really, really important that the airlines look at the big picture here and see that actually there needs to be some sort of investment that kind of comes in that allows you to, or the customer to actually go through that process, and the customer can trust the airline there and the processes to do those things. And you mentioned a really interesting thing there about standards as well, or it might have been Simon that mentioned it. Standards are important. I fully expect there not to be one standard, but there to be multiple standards. So if we're not careful, my fear is that we might well end up with a proliferation of frameworks and even apps and other kind of online solutions that will get a passenger from A to B, which again is going to erode both brand from an airline point of view and the confidence to travel as well. So it strikes me when I look at this, and these are very much my views here, that airlines would be interested in trying to bring that into their own ecosystem if they can, but to be able to do that in a common way, much the same way they do with the likes of thematic type services today for ETAs.
I think that I fully agree. There are two things. You have the information that will allow passengers to really not to worry anymore of what they need, and everything has to be checked before their departure from home. And that's something that all the players in the industry would like to see seamless, let's say, in the future. The second thing is that but at the same time, they have the priority to keep as much information as they can, because they need information and a database of their customer, profile, also to still do their jobs in trying to answer to their needs. So there is two types of data: the data that are the data needed for allowing to travel seamlessly, and the data that airline keep today or are managing today to allow them to make sure they answer to the needs of their customers or their loyal customers. So, and that's really two dimensions that today airlines definitely they see the difference, but there's a lack of guidance and the long-term vision on a global basis for the demand travel, nature of data that our industry will need to restore trust.
Yeah, you've raised a few really interesting parts there, from that commercial aspect through to the necessary aspect as well. And I'm a great case in point. I'm here on screen as Raoul Cooper. Everyone knows me as Raoul Cooper, but on my passport, this is not my real one, don't worry, it actually says Jonathan. So I'm a Jonathan Cooper. So from a commercial point of view, I'm a Raoul, and from a APIS and travel point of view, I'm a Jonathan. And these two worlds constantly collide. Indeed, if I ring up a formal organization, there's then, well, which name do they actually register with this organization with? Did I say Raoul or Jonathan? And you go through the loop there. So I think, again, in my mind, coming back to identity and knowing that an individual is an individual is really, really important.
As a former passport officer, Raoul, your passport should be in the name you use.
There we go. I've learned something. We'll pick one off. That one up.
You may get a fine as well now.
This one's not a genuine passport.
I was just going to pick up the interesting comment that Alex has made in the sidebar about Greece and Israel having an agreement on travel for vaccinated people. That's great, but that's one route. There are many, many hundreds of routes all around the world, and I think for travelers, and particularly travelers who use lots of different routes, I think there does need to be some sort of consistency and standardization about how those sorts of things operate, and particularly for airlines that will offer multiple routes. If airlines have also got to think, well, if I'm traveling between this territory and this territory, I need to do this thing, but if I'm traveling on this other route, I need to do some other different thing. I think the more that both the industry, the traveling public, and public authorities can come together to make it simple, or more simple, the better. And I think one other thing, I don't want people to think that I'm saying we'll get rid of all paper documents, because I have to keep reminding my own colleagues, when we talk about biometric identity and using biometric gates at airports, people say, oh, you won't need to carry your passport. You're always going to need to carry your passport. You're always going to need that document. So maybe you'll always have that paper document that shows that you have got that vaccination status, or that you have that test result status. But we should also be looking for ways for those who are able to, and in circumstances where it is possible, to be able to demonstrate that status without presenting and handing over a piece of paper for somebody else to touch.
Really
so we will always have the paper documents, but we will also have the digital versions of them too. So one thing we haven't touched on is the work that's being done on the development of digital travel credentials. We're all very used to the idea of the travel document being a paper book or a plastic card. In future, it'll be a paper book, a plastic card, or an app on your mobile device.
Thank you. And from the point of view of of trust then. So there might be a number of these digital passports come to life through DTC and things like that. When it comes to trust and data security, what is it that you think about are the important facts that need to be beared in mind, and what is government doing around that aspect of trust that can give confidence both to the travelling public, but also to the organisations that have got to deal with these digital identifiers?
Well, I think you are back again to standards. So particularly in the world of digital passports hopefully will work. They're not a reality yet, but they're coming very soon. Will work because they work to a common international standard, and that people should put their trust in the standard and the compliance with the standard.
Thank you then, Simon.
Yeah,
that's good. We've just come up on the hour, so I'm very conscious of time. So what I will do is I'll just cycle around and ask for closing comments from each of you, 60 seconds on what you think we can do next and what our action should be leaving this webinar. Christine, let's start with yourself.
Thank you, Raoul. I think first it was a pleasure to exchange some ideas. I think that some of the comments very important that there is a short-term priority to restore trust as soon as possible, and to make travel a pleasure for all travelers again, not fearing to facing difficulty in their journey. So and there is a long term. I think that the way to be successful is all the stakeholders need to work together and find solution as contactless as possible in the future, and accepting some maybe paper solution to start with, to make sure that we don't wait for the ideal solution that maybe will never happen in a quite complex world. I think that there is a way out. There is a quite successful vaccination program in the UK and in some countries. I strongly believe that maybe travel will not be possible to all destinations short term, but we will definitely be able, hopefully, to open our borders as soon as possible between countries that have put in place very serious and professional programs of vaccination and testing. So I think hope is important, and positive thoughts too, because we need both of them to see a quick recovery.
Thank you, Christine. Very true. Simon Wilcox, closing comments.
Yeah, thank you as well for inviting me to join the conversation today. I think in the short term, it's about just continuing to provide clarity to customers and informing them on what really the requirements are, and making that as simple as possible, and using the variety of technology that's available. In the mid to long term, though, I think we have a tendency in the industry. Obviously, we're thinking about it from an air travel perspective, and identity is not a air travel specific need or solution, and therefore I think I'd echo entirely Abhi's point earlier about we need to think about like another option like financial services. I can see different models coming in, and I think as a customer, you're going to have your way of your preferred choice of asserting your identity, and I think there will be a number of partners out there, and that's exciting. I think we can certainly see some new commercial models coming in, and because of that approach, I think from an airline perspective, that's great news, because it means not all the cost is borne by the airlines, and so we need to take a bigger view. But in the short term, make the best of what we've got, and inform customers of those requirements.
Great, thank you, Simon. It's very eloquently put. Simon, Simon Watkin, closing comments.
I think we're very much still in the eye of the storm. I think when we'll look back on time, we'll say, it was still quite difficult in February 2021. So I think there'll be the short-term immediate responses, but I think we should be looking to plan for what the longer term is, and we can't know how people are going to react because we can't know quite where we're going to be in the longer term. I think we also need to enable both analog and digital solutions to sit by the side of each other, and for one or other to gain ascendancy. And I think, and again, picking up on points in the sidebar, shouldn't just, I hope I haven't suggested it's just about vaccination. It's about vaccination or virus-free status. So again, it's just about having mechanisms in place and standards in place that will allow individuals to travel and a basis on which they can travel. Vaccination certificate could be one of those. Test status could be another, exemption status, but the form in which they're able to evidence that and use that evidence to undertake the journey they wish to take is what's going to make this happen, and enabling it to work so that the public authorities at either end of the journey, the carrier and the passenger, can all interact as seamlessly and efficiently as possible to enable the carrier to do their business and the passenger to make their journey.
Very well put, Simon. Thank you. And finally, Abhi, closing comments.
Airlines and airports are cash constrained at the moment. Most of the, many of them are fighting for their survival. So they need to conserve the cash that they have and limit the investment to the absolute essential things that they need to do to keep the business running. So, we should be prepared to deal with the increase in volume with paper-based certificates. We should also be prepared to deal with maybe 50-60% of the 2019 volume during the summer months if infection levels come down. But in terms of technology and how we use technology, I would state it as 3 stages. The immediate and essential thing that needs to be done, as Simon said, is to bring in clarity for each destination for the sake of the passenger, and make sure that that sort of compliance to the regulation and all the prerequisites for the travel to that destination is met by the passenger, and it's prompted to the passenger to meet those criteria, and that's done off airport before they actually travel to the airport to take the flight, and it can be done through the airline systems or airline app or website, etc. So that is the first thing, and probably the only thing airlines and airport can afford to do in the short term. Medium term would be to reuse existing biometric and other type of infrastructure, mostly as point solutions, to ease the congestion that may happen at certain points as the traffic picks up later down the line. And thirdly, long-term solutions, which a lot of other panelists have mentioned a number of times. It certainly has a good case, and we should try to continue to pursue that for the sake of seamless journey for long-term normal travel, as well as potential waves that might be there down the line from COVID as well.
Thank you, Abhi, and thank you indeed all our panelists for your contributions today. Really, really useful and helpful. In summary, from my perspective, it strikes me that there is a demand and there is a desire to see standards come through. If we wait for standards, we'll be waiting a long time. So it is actually, I believe, the private sector that needs to really push on this. And we need to be aware that different countries and different standards will emerge at different speeds. We also need to be aware that if we're going to do more and more off-airport to keep the airports flowing really, really well, then that needs to be hooked in and linked to identity. And with that comes trust. So the big question around that is how you establish those trusts, and there are mechanisms to do that. As was mentioned by, I think, everyone here, there is not money to throw around at these problems today. But there are the methods by which this can be done at low cost and using the existing technologies that are available. So purely from a Zamna point of view, we center all our business on this, about not ripping and replacing what exists already, but actually coming alongside and providing inclusive tools that actually allow customers and, more importantly, businesses to operate around identity on what we call identity rails that allows you to do all these different things with ease and get the industry moving again. So thank you again to Christine, to Abhi, and to Simon W. and Simon W. Really appreciated your contributions today. At this point, we'll say goodbye from us, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.